The wind in this part of Wyoming territory did not just blow, it scoured. It scraped the land down to the bone, just as it had scraped Miriam's life down to this one solitary point. Her homestead was the last thing before the land gave up and became nothing but sage and distance. It stood 3 miles west of Bitter Creek, a town that was itself dying, clinging to a dried-up water source and a rumor of a railroad that was never coming. The house was a monument to failure. Half of it, the main room and lean-to, was built of stubborn cottonwood. The other half was a collection of blackened timbers, the ghost of a second room and a barn, taken by a fire 2 winters gone. Miriam lived in the part that remained. She was a woman built like the territory, lean, hard-boned, and striking in a way that frightened horses and men. Her hair was the color of wheat dust, pulled back so tight it stretched the skin over her high cheeks. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky just before the sun drops, a pale, cold gray. She was 28, but the wind and the grief had carved lines around her eyes and mouth that belonged to a woman of 50. She was, to the folk of Bitter Creek, a pariah, a stain, the widow Calloway. Her husband, Jedediah Calloway, had died in that fire 2 winters back. Or maybe he had died of the cold just before it. Or maybe he had died of a bottle of rot-gut whiskey. The stories changed with the teller. When Miriam rode her gray mule into town for salt and flour, the town stopped. It was not a loud stopping. It was a cessation of sound. Hammers would pause on anvils. Women sweeping their boardwalks would still their brooms. Men leaning against the hitching posts outside the saloon would straighten up, just a little. Then, the whispers. "There she is. Looks thin, hawkish. Thin is better than what Jed got. Heard she locked him out. In the blizzard, just locked the door and let the cold take him. I heard he was drunk, fell and hit his head, and she just watched, let the fire catch his clothes. She did worse. She said it. I know she did." Miriam heard them. She had been hearing them for 2 years. She kept her back straight, her chin up, and her eyes fixed on the door of Hatcher's General Mercantile. The men's attention was different. Their whispers were not about murder. They were about opportunity. They looked at her not as a woman, but as a vacancy. They saw the straight line of her spine, the swing of her hips in the worn denim trousers she wore under a man's coat, and the gray eyes that promised nothing soft. Their stares were heavy, physical things. They were leers that undressed her in the cold, assessing her like a stray mare that might be broken to a new saddle, or might kick a man's teeth out. Silas Croft, who had been Jed's drinking partner, tipped his hat one afternoon, blocking her path on the boardwalk. His teeth were yellow. "Ms. Calloway, it is a hard winter for a woman alone." Miriam stopped. She looked at his hand on his hat, then at his watery eyes. "It is a hard winter for everyone, Mr. Croft. A body could get cold, out there, all alone." She gave him the smile. It was not a real smile. It was a sharp, bitter pulling of her lips, a baring of teeth. It was the smile of a coyote that knows where the traps are laid. "I keep a good fire, sir." She stepped around him, leaving him standing there, his hat still in his hand, his face darkening. Inside the store, it was worse. Mrs. Davies and the preacher's wife, Mrs. Albright, were inspecting bolts of calico when Miriam entered, the bell jangling above the door. Their conversation froze. Mrs. Davies visibly pulled her skirt closer, as if Miriam's shadow might soil it. Mr. Hatcher, polishing the glass of his candy jar, sighed. "Ma'am." "Mr. Hatcher, I need 10 pounds of flour, 2 of salt, and a box of cartridges. 30-30. "Hunting?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Surviving," Miriam replied. She paid not with coin, which she rarely had, but with 3 thick rabbit pelts and a gray fox she had trapped and skinned herself. The pelts were perfect, Her work was always clean. Hatcher inspected them, grunted, and pushed her supplies across the counter. She did not rush. She packed her saddlebags slowly, deliberately, forcing them to endure her presence. She met Mrs. Davies's stare until the woman flushed and turned back to the calico. Then she walked out, mounted her mule, and rode back into the vast, empty silence that was her only companion. Her life was a rhythm of hard necessities. She did not weep. Weeping was a luxury, like sugar or coffee, and she had run out of both long ago. Pride was what she had left, stubborn, raw-boned pride. It was pride that made her rise before the sun, breaking the ice in the wash basin to splash the frigid water on her face. It was pride that made her sweep the packed earth floor of her cabin every single day. It was pride that sent her into the low hills with Jed's old rifle, her eyes scanning for the flick of a rabbit's ear or the rust-colored flash of a fox. She was a dead shot. She had to be. Missing a shot meant a cold supper and a gnawing stomach. It was pride that made her climb onto the sagging roof of the cabin with a handful of bent nails and a sheet of tin she had hammered flat from an old can. The wind tore at her patches. The snow and the rain always found a new way in. But she climbed up, teeth gritted against the cold, and hammered the patch into place. She knew the plants. She gathered yarrow to pack wounds, willow bark to chew for fevers, and bitterroot to boil when the meat ran out. Her hands were scarred, the nails broken, the skin cracked and stained with dirt and plant juice. She was alone, utterly. The cabin was silent, save for the wind and the scrape of her knife on a skinning board. Sometimes, she would talk to the mule. "Well, Samson," she would say, her voice rough from disuse. "Another day done." And she would stand at her one window, not glass, but oiled paper that rattled in the wind, and look out at the miles of nothing. She was surviving. It was a victory she claimed every night, a bitter, lonely thing. One afternoon, the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. The wind, which had been a constant whine, dropped into a low, threatening growl. A storm was coming. A bad one. She had spent the morning securing the mule in the half-burnt lean-to that served as a stable, stacking her last cords of wood against the cabin wall. She was inside, stoking the fire in the small cast-iron stove, when she heard it. It was not the wind. It was a sound of panic. A horse's scream, thin and high, ripped apart by the wind. Miriam's hand went to the rifle she kept resting against the wall. She moved to the door, her heart a cold knot in her chest. Visitors were never good. They were either drunk townsmen looking for sport, or they were trouble. She cracked the door. The wind tore it from her grip, slamming it open against the wall. And she saw it. A horse, a fine bay gelding, was stumbling in her yard. It was lathered, its sides heaving, its eyes were white with terror. The saddle was empty, and the horse's flank, and the saddle, and the reins were dark and sticky with blood. Not just a little, a lot. The horse tried to move toward the lean-to, drawn by the scent of the mule, and then its legs buckled. It fell onto its side in the gathering snow, its breathing a wet, ragged whistle. Miriam stared, the rifle heavy in her hands. A riderless horse, lathered in blood, meant only one thing: violence. And it meant a man was out there, somewhere close, hurt or dead. She scanned the gray line of the hills. Nothing, just the wind and the first hard flakes of snow beginning to drive sideways. She pulled the heavy door shut and slid the thick wooden bar into place. It was not her business. The world had made it clear that her business was her own, and theirs was theirs. A man out there was a man who brought trouble. Jed had brought trouble. All men brought trouble. She went back to the stove. She put a pot of water on to boil. For tea, for willow bark. She tried to ignore the sound. The horse was screaming again, a terrible, choking sound. "Damn it," she whispered. "Damn it all." She unbarred the door. She grabbed her coat. She would put the animal out of its misery, that was all. a kindness she would give to a beast that she would not expect from a man. She stepped onto the porch, chambering around. The wind hit her like a solid wall. The snow was coming down thick now, a curtain of white. And then she saw him. He was not a man, he was a heap, a dark shape against the snow. Not 10 yards from her door. He must have crawled. He had been hidden by a swell in the land until he was right on top of her. He was a cowboy, judging by the ruins of his clothes. A canvas jacket, dark denim, and high boots. He was lying face down. Miriam stood there for a long time, maybe 10 seconds, maybe a full minute. The snow began to cover his shoulders. If she left him, he would be a frozen mound by morning. The storm would take him. It would be neat, it would be clean. It would be just like the gossip said she had done to Jed. She spat into the wind. "God," she hissed, to no one. "Why me?" She walked over to him, her rifle pointed at his unmoving back. She nudged him with her boot. A groan, low and wet. He was alive. With a sigh that sounded more like a curse, she leaned the rifle against the porch. She grabbed the man by the collar of his jacket. He was heavy, a dead weight. "You are a fool," she grumbled, her voice snatched by the wind. "A bleeding, freezing fool." She hauled him. She was strong, wiry and tough, but he was a tall man, all long limbs and dead muscle. She dragged him across the yard, his boots cutting 2 parallel grooves in the fresh snow. His blood left a dark, smeared trail. She got him onto the porch. She could not lift him. She had to drag him, inch by inch, over the threshold. He groaned again, a hotter, sharper sound, as his leg bumped the door frame. She slammed the door shut against the howling storm and barred it. For a moment, she just stood there, breathing hard, her hands on her knees. The cabin was suddenly terribly small. It smelled of wet wool, iron, and the hot, copper smell of blood, his blood, all over her floor. "Well," she said to the lump on the ground, "you have made a mess." He was half conscious, his body shaking with a deep, ague-like chill. She worked with a grim, practiced efficiency. First, the light. The storm was making the afternoon as dark as night. She lit the kerosene lamp, the flame casting huge, unsteady shadows. Then, him. She couldn't get him on her cot. Not yet. She rolled him onto his back. He was younger than Jed, maybe her age. His face was gray with shock and cold, covered in a dark stubble. A messy scar cut through one eyebrow. Even unconscious, his face was tensed in pain. The wound was in his left thigh. High up, the denim was soaked black. Miriam went to her stores. She brought back the kettle of hot water, her sewing tin, a bottle of corn whiskey she kept for medicine, and a clean rag. She took her hunting knife, the one she used for skinning, and cut his trousers away from the leg, from ankle to hip. The denim was stiff, frozen in places, glued to his skin with blood. He cried out when the cold air hit the wound. It was ugly, a bullet hole. It looked like it had gone clean through, but it had torn the muscle badly. It was bleeding sluggishly, the cold having slowed it. "This is going to hurt," she muttered, mostly to herself. "And you are going to bleed on my floor. Again." She poured a splash of whiskey directly onto the wound. The man screamed. It was not a yell, but a sharp, high-pitched intake of breath that turned into a raw, choking sound. His entire body arched off the floor, his back bowing. His eyes flew open. They were a hazy, fever-bright blue, but they did not see her. "Hold still," she commanded, pressing her hand on his chest to keep him down. "Hold still, you fool, or you will bleed out right here." He fell back, unconscious again, or perhaps just fainted from the pain. His skin was burning. The fever was already on him. She threaded her heaviest needle with gut line. She washed the wound as best she could with the hot water and the rag. Then, her lips set in a thin, hard line, she began to sew. It was like sewing thick leather. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled just a little. This was not a rabbit. This was a man. His flesh puckered and pulled. He groaned with every pass of the needle, a low, animal sound deep in his chest. His heat was radiating through her hands. It was an intimate, terrible thing. "You best not die," she grumbled, pulling a stitch tight. "I am wasting good thread on you." She finished. The stitches were crude, but they were tight. The bleeding had stopped. She bandaged the wound with a strip torn from one of her few good linen sheets. She managed, finally, to get him onto her cot. She stripped his wet clothes off him, the jacket, the shirt, the other boot, with a practical, impersonal roughness. She saw the old, faded scars on his torso, a long white line down his ribs, a pucker on his shoulder. This was not his first brush with violence. She covered him with her thickest quilt. He was shaking, his teeth chattering, even as his skin burned. She sat back on her heels, exhausted. The storm was a solid roar outside. The cabin was warm, but it felt invaded. Her eyes went to his discarded belongings, piled near the door. The canvas jacket, the soaked saddlebags. Curiosity was a dangerous thing, but practicality was a necessity. She needed to know who she had just sewn up. She needed to know what kind of trouble was now sleeping in her bed. She went through his things. His pockets were empty. The saddlebags were heavy. She pulled them open. No money, not a single coin. There was a canvas pouch with a handful of .44 cartridges, a whetstone, a length of rope, a small, tin-type photograph of a woman and two small children. Faded and bent at the corners. His family. Lost, most likely. People did not come to Wyoming with their families intact. Then, two things. The first was a heavy, silver pocket watch. The glass was shattered. The hands were stopped at 310. She turned it over. There was no inscription. It was just a good, solid watch, now broken. The second thing was at the bottom of the bag. A Bible. Small, bound in black leather, the cover worn smooth and soft at the edges. It was not his. The name on the flyleaf was Thomas, but the pages were marked, and a single passage in Psalms was underlined in faint pencil. A smear of dark, dry blood stained the corner of the cover. Miriam put the things back. A poor man, a man with a family gone, a man who carried a broken watch and someone else's Bible, and a man who had been shot. She built up the fire. The wood crackled, fighting the sound of the wind. She sat in her one chair, the rifle across her lap, and watched him. Hours passed. The storm reached its peak, a deafening shriek that seemed to want to tear the cabin from the earth. The oiled paper window rattled. Snow hissed against the wood. The man on the cot mumbled. He turned his head. His dreams were not good. No, North Fork got ambushed. His voice was a dry rasp. North Fork ambush. Miriam's blood ran cold. North Fork, that was up by the Powder River. Word had come down to Bitter Creek a week ago. A dispute over water rights. A small rancher and his hands ambushed by men working for the big cattle baron. A war, they called it. It meant this man had enemies, and those enemies might be looking for him. Suddenly, he woke. His eyes snapped open and they were clear, not feverish, clear and sharp. He focused on her instantly. Where? My cabin. You collapsed in my yard. Miriam did not move from the chair. Her voice was flat. He tried to sit up. He saw the quilt. He saw his bare chest. He looked down at his leg, at the thick bandage. He grunted in pain. I sewed you up. She said, you were shot. He absorbed this. He looked at her, then at the rifle in her lap. Thank you, ma'am, he said. His voice was quiet, polite, but strained. I have to leave. I cannot bring trouble on you. He swung his legs over the side of the cot, his jaw clenched. Do not be a fool, Miriam said, her voice tired. "You cannot even stand." "I have to." He put his weight on his good leg. He pushed himself up. He swayed, his face slick with sweat. He took one step. His wounded leg buckled completely. He gasped, a sharp, ragged sound, and collapsed, catching himself on his hands and knees on the floor. He stayed there, his head hanging, breathing hard. Miriam watched him, the strong, capable cowboy. Now, a half-naked, wounded animal on her floor. "I told you," she said. He did not answer. He just breathed. She stood up, leaning the rifle by the door. She went to the cot, ripped the quilt off it, and threw it at him. It landed on his back. "You can sleep there," she said. "It is warmer by the fire." He looked up at her. His eyes were filled with a mixture of pain, humiliation, and a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "Ma'am." "Do not talk," she said. "Save your strength. You will need it to heal." She went to the door. She looked out the small crack, out at the world. It was gone. There was no yard. There was no hill. There was only a solid, churning wall of white. The snow was already 3 feet deep and rising. The wind howled like a legion of ghosts. Even if he were healthy, he could not ride 5 feet in this. The horse out in the yard was surely dead by now, buried. Miriam sighed. It was a long, slow exhale, the sound of a trap springing. She shut the door. She slid the heavy wooden bar into its iron brackets. The thud was final. The cowboy, Eli, had crawled back under the quilt near the fire, his teeth chattering again from the fever and the exertion. Miriam went back to her chair. She sat down. They were trapped, both of them. Trapped by the storm, trapped by the bullet, trapped by the past. She picked up the rifle again and settled in to wait. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell hard. The first 3 days were a blur of fever and blizzard. The world shrank to the 4 walls of the cabin, and then shrank further, to the sounds of the man's breathing and the shriek of the wind. The storm was a living thing. It clawed at the roof, shoved against the door, and screamed down the chimney pipe, filling the room with the smell of cold soot. Miriam kept the fire in the stove roaring, feeding it precious wood from her dwindling pile. The heat was a small, fragile bubble in an ocean of lethal cold. His name was Eli. He had told her in a moment of gasping lucidity, his eyes wide and burning. Eli Rowe. He was very sick. The wound, despite her crude stitching and the whiskey cleanse, was hot and angry. The fever took him, plunged him deep. He thrashed on the cot, his long limbs tangling in her one good quilt. He muttered of things she could not understand. North Fork was a constant, a ragged plea. But other words came, too. "Thomas, run! The water! God, the water!" Miriam worked. She did not comfort. She survived. She left her chair only to tend to him or the fire. She slept sitting up, the rifle across her lap, her head nodding against her chest, waking at every groan he made. She tore up another sheet, her last, for bandages. She boiled snow water and herbs, forcing the bitter tea between his cracked lips. He would choke, turn his head, but she was relentless. She would pinch his nose, and when his mouth opened to breathe, she would pour a spoonful in. "Drink," she commanded the unconscious man. "You will not die in here. I will not have it." She cleaned the wound. She had to do it twice a day. She would unwrap the bandage, her stomach tightening at the angry, puckered flesh. She washed it with boiled salt water, her touch rough and impersonal. He would groan, a deep, animal sound, and his body would tense, but he was too far under to fight her. She was exhausted. Her arms ached from hauling wood. Her eyes burned from smoke and lack of sleep. But there was a stubborn set to her jaw. The town, the past, the world. They had all tried to break her. This fever, this man. They would not break her either. On the 4th morning, the wind finally dropped from a shriek to a low, keening moan. The cabin was strangely quiet, and the man was quiet. Miriam woke with a jolt, her hand tightening on the rifle. The silence was wrong. He was not groaning. He was not breathing. She was at the cot in 2 strides. She put her hand on his chest. He was still. "No," she whispered, a hiss of pure frustration. "No, you do not." She pressed her ear to his chest, the smell of his sweat and fever sharp in her nose. A beat, faint, another. He was alive. He was just sleeping. She pulled back and saw his eyes. They were open, not wide and burning, but slitted, and they were clear. The fever-bright blue had cooled to a deep, washed-out gray blue, the color of a creek in shadow. He was looking at her. "Ma'am," he whispered. His voice was a dry scrape. Miriam straightened up, pulling her defenses around her like a coat. "You are awake." "Water." She got him water, lifting his head with one hand. He drank greedily, water spilling down his chin. He coughed. "Thank you," he breathed, falling back. "The fever broke," she said, stating a fact. She went to the stove and stirred the pot, a thin broth made from the last of a rabbit. He was quiet, but his eyes followed her. They tracked her every move as she ladled the broth into a bowl, as she walked back to him, as she stood looking down at him. "You will need to sit," she said. He tried. He pushed himself up on his elbows, and the effort left him shaking, his face pale and slick. She did not offer to help. She waited. He gritted his teeth, his jaw tightening, and managed to prop himself against the wall. She handed him the bowl. His hands shook so badly he could not hold the spoon. A long, tense silence filled the room. There was only the sound of the wind, the click of the spoon against the bowl as he tried to steady it. "Damn it," he whispered, a sound of pure humiliation. Miriam sighed, a sharp, impatient sound. She took the bowl from him. "You are weak as a kitten." She sat on the edge of the cot. "Open your mouth." He stared at her, his pride warring with his weakness. "I have spent 4 days keeping you alive. Cowboy, do not be a fool now." He opened his mouth. She fed him, spoonful by spoonful. It was a strange, terrible intimacy. She was not gentle. She was efficient, but she was close. She could smell the salt and sickness on him. He could see the fine lines at the corners of her gray eyes, the chapped skin of her lips. When the bowl was empty, she stood up abruptly. "I am grateful, ma'am," he said. "Gratitude will not patch my roof," she replied, turning her back. "Rest. You are no good to me like this." The days that followed settled into a new, tense rhythm. The storm did not break. It paused, gathered its strength, and returned. The snow piled in monstrous drifts against the cabin, burying the window, plunging the room into a perpetual twilight, lit only by the lamp and the stove. Eli healed. Slowly. The color returned to his face. The strength returned to his limbs. He could sit up on his own. Then he could stand, leaning on a piece of wood she had given him for a crutch. He was, as she had first thought, a quiet man. His politeness was a wall. He said please and thank you. He never complained. He ate what she gave him, and the food was running low. The rabbit was gone. They were down to boiled root and the last of her flour, made into a thin gruge. But he was guarded. "What happened at North Fork?" she asked one afternoon, her voice flat as she cleaned her rifle. He was sitting on the cot, sharpening her skinning knife with a whetstone he had found in his bag. The shing, shing, shing of the stone was a nervous, scratching sound. He did not look up. "Trouble." "I gathered that you were shot." "Yes, ma'am." "Who shot you?" He stopped. He tested the blade with his thumb. "Men who wanted something that was not theirs." "And the Bible, the one with Thomas written in it?" His hand stilled. He set the knife down. "He was my friend. He did not make it." "And your wife? The children in the picture?" He looked up then, His eyes were cold. "That is my business. Ma's. You are in my house, sleeping in my bed, eating my food. You have made yourself my business." "I aim to leave as soon as the snow clears," he said, his voice quiet but final. "I will pay you for the trouble, or work it off." "With what?" she scoffed. "You have nothing but a broken watch and a dead man's Bible." His face darkened. He said nothing, turning back to the whetstone. Miriam felt a small, bitter victory. She had pushed him. She had found the edge. She did not know why she did it. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the confinement. His presence was a disruption. Jed had been loud, drunk, violent. His rages and his demands had filled this cabin. Eli was the opposite. He was a still, watchful presence. He took up space, but he did it with a quiet she found more unnerving than any noise. So she filled the silence herself. She used words like she used her rifle, to keep things at a distance. "You are lucky I was the one who found you," she said, snapping the rifle's action closed. "Anyone else from town would have left you for the wolves." "Why did you not?" he asked, not looking up. "Did not feel like digging a grave in a blizzard." She smiled her bitter smile. "Besides, my mule was getting lonely." He did not smile back. He just watched her. She began to tease him. A brittle, sharp-edged flirtation. It was a weapon. It was her armor. "You sleep heavy for a man on the run," she'd say in the morning, stoking the fire. "I could have cut your throat 10 times over." "I suppose I trust you, ma'am," he'd reply, his voice even. "That is your first mistake. Never trust anyone, especially not a woman who lives alone. We get strange." She would let her coat fall open, revealing the man's shirt she wore, tucked into her denim trousers. She knew his eyes followed the line of her body. She knew he noticed. She wanted him to notice. It gave her a sense of power, a feeling she had not had since before Jed. But there were cracks in their armor. She still had to change his bandage. The wound was healing, the stitches holding, but it needed to be kept clean. On the 7th day, she knelt by the cot to unwrap the linen. "I can do it," he said, reaching for the bandage. "You cannot. You will tear the stitches." She pushed his hand away. Her fingers brushed the skin of his thigh, just above the wound. It was warm, solid, alive. Her hand trembled. It was just a tremor, a tiny, involuntary flicker of her fingers. But in the quiet cabin, it was as loud as a gunshot. She froze. He froze. He saw it. His eyes lifted from her hand to her face. He saw the sudden vulnerability, the crack in her sharp facade. She snatched her hand back as if burned. "Hold still!" she snapped, her voice too harsh. She finished the work with a jerky, angry movements. Her face turned away from him. He did not speak, but he had seen. And she saw him. His nightmares were bad. He did not just mumble, he fought. He would cry out, a sharp, choked, "No!" or "Thomas, behind you!" One night, she woke to him thrashing, his arms flailing, his eyes wide open but seeing nothing. He was strangling the quilt. "Eli," she said. He did not hear. "Eli," she said, louder, crossing the room. She grabbed his shoulders and shook him. "Wake up! You are here! You are safe!" He snapped awake. He grabbed her wrists, his grip like iron. He was panting, his eyes wild. He stared at her, uncomprehending. "Where?" "You are in my cabin. You were dreaming." He let go of her wrists, the strength going out of him. He scrubbed his face with his hands. "I am sorry. I am sorry." "Do not be sorry," she said, her voice flat. She went back to her chair. "Just be quiet." She sat in the dark, watching him. He did not go back to sleep. He sat with his head in his hands. His shoulders slumped. She saw the shape of his grief. It was a familiar thing. A different cut, but the same wound. The tension in the cabin grew thick, like the snow outside. It was in the shared meals, eaten in silence. It was in the scrape of her spoon, the tap of his crutch. It was in the long moments when she would be mending a stocking and, looking up, would find him watching her. He would not look away. He would just hold her gaze, his expression unreadable, until she flushed and looked back at her work, her fingers fumbling with the needle. The space was too small. They breathed the same air. They were acutely aware of each other's bodies. The way he moved, the way she tucked a stray piece of hair behind her ear, the way he smelled of faint sweat and wool, and the yarrow she used on his wound, the way she smelled of wood smoke and soap. One night, the storm paused again. The silence was absolute, heavy. The snow outside seemed to drink all sound. The only noise was the pop and hiss of the fire. They had eaten their thin gruel. Eli was propped on the cot. Miriam was sitting on the floor, polishing her boots with the last of the tallow. She could feel him watching her. It was a physical pressure on her skin. She looked up. "You are staring again." "Forgive me," he said. His voice was low. "There is not much else to look at. You looked your fill when I was feeding you like a baby." "That is not the look I am giving you, Miriam." He used her name, not ma'am. Miriam. Her name felt strange in his mouth, heavy. She stood up, her movements restless. She went to the stove, added a piece of wood. She turned, her back to the fire, warming her hands behind her back. The firelight threw her shadow long and dark across the floor, all the way to his cot. "You should be careful. Eli Rowe," she said, her voice soft, dangerous. "Careful of what?" "Of me." She met his gaze. The cabin was hot. "The townsfolk, they say I am a witch, that I let my husband freeze, that I am a—" She could not say the word. "They say I am ruined." "I do not listen to gossip." He said, "Maybe you should." She took a step closer, and then another. She stopped just out of his reach. "It has been 2 years, 2 winters. That is a long time to be alone." She held up her hands, looking at them in the firelight. They were scarred, chapped, but they were steady now. "My hands," she warned, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. "They wander when I'm lonely." He did not move. He did not pull away. He did not break her gaze. His blue-gray eyes were steady, watching her, taking in her words. He just waited. His stillness was a challenge. Her warning had not scared him. He was not recoiling. She felt the familiar, cold panic rising, the humiliation of being seen, of being vulnerable. She had to break it. She had to prove she was in control. Or maybe, deep down, she wanted to prove the townsfolk were right. Before she could think, before she could stop, she closed the distance. She leaned down. She put one hand on his shoulder, hard, lean muscle under the thin shirt, and the other on his jaw. His stubble was rough against her palm. She kissed him. It was not a soft kiss. It was a kiss of hunger, of rage, of 2 years of frozen silence. It was a desperate, angry claiming. She pushed her mouth against his, tasting the salt on his skin, the faint bitterness of the willow bark tea. For 1 second, he was stiff, surprised. Then, his own loneliness answered. A low sound raised in his chest. His hand came up, not gently, entangled in the hair at the nape of her neck, holding her fast. He kissed her back. It was not polite. It was not guarded. It was a raw, immediate response. It was iron and heat and desperation. The world tilted. She felt a pulling in her stomach, a heat that had nothing to do with the stove. Then, just as she was falling into it, he broke it. He grabbed her shoulders. His grip was firm. He pushed her back. "Miriam," he breathed, his voice ragged. "Do not—" She froze. The heat vanished, replaced by a stinging, Arctic cold. She could feel the blood draining from her face, then rushing back in a hot, dark wave of shame. He had stopped her. He had rejected her. She felt ugly. She felt like the thing they whispered about in town, the desperate widow, the whore. "Get your hands off me!" she hissed, her voice shaking. She scrambled back from the cot, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, as if to wipe the kiss away. "Miriam," he said. He was breathing hard, his eyes dark. "I am sorry. I did not mean to." "You are sorry?" Her laugh was a broken, bitter sound. "What are you sorry for? Pitying me? Is that it? You think I am so desperate for a man I would throw myself at a half-dead drifter?" "No," he said, and his voice was firm. "That is not it." He looked down at his own hands, clasped in front of him. I lost someone. My wife, Anna. She is gone. A long time now." He looked up, and his eyes were filled with a pain that matched her own. "I do not want to hurt you, and I do not want to be just a body filling a space for you. You deserve better than that." It was the worst thing he could have said. It was pity. He saw her as a lonely, grieving woman, so desperate she would use any man for comfort. He saw her as damaged. "Hurt me?" She was on her feet now, vibrating with a rage that was so cold it burned. "You think you can hurt me? You think a man like you has anything left to take from me?" She pointed a trembling finger at him. "Nothing can hurt me, not anymore." She strode to the door, her back rigid. "The storm sounds like it is easing. In the morning, you will walk. I do not care if your leg falls off. You will get out. Get out of my house." She turned from him, grabbed her thin blanket from the chair, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She would not sleep. She stood by the window, her back to him, staring at the oiled paper that rattled in the wind. The silence in the cabin was a new, terrible thing. It was worse than the storm. It was the sound of a wound being torn open. Then a new sound began. It started low, a deep moan from the hills. It was not the wind. It rose, a chorus of high, thin howls. Wolves. They were close, driven by the endless storm, starved. They had found the scent of the dead horse, buried somewhere under the drifts. The howling was a promise of the savage, hungry world waiting just outside the thin wooden walls. And as if in answer to her command for him to leave, the wind rose again. It did not just rise, it exploded. A fresh wave of the blizzard hit the cabin with the force of a solid object, making the timbers groan. The door rattled violently in its bar. Eli said nothing. Miriam did not turn around. The gray, dim light of morning finally came. Miriam, stiff and cold, unbarred the door. She did not open it. She just cracked it, peering out. Her heart sank. The world was gone, erased. There was no yard, no lean-to, no path. There was only a solid, vertical wall of white. The snow had drifted higher than the porch roof, sealing them in. Leaving was not a choice. It was an impossibility. She slammed the door shut. The sound was final. She turned. Eli was awake, watching her. His face was pale, his eyes bruised with lack of sleep. He did not say, "I told you so." He did not say anything. Miriam walked past him, her face a mask of stone. She did not look at him. She did not speak. She went to the woodpile. She picked up the axe. She began to split kindling, the thwack of the blade sharp and violent in the small space. She melted snow for water. She boiled the last of the bitter root. She poured a cup and slammed it on the floor by his cot, not meeting his eyes. She did not speak to him all day, but she kept the fire going. The silence was a third person in the cabin. It was heavy and cold, a shroud they both wore. For a full day, they did not speak. Miriam moved with a stiff, furious energy. Her jaw set. She split kindling, melted snow, and swept the floor, her movements sharp and loud in the quiet. Eli sat on the cot, his hands resting on his knees, and watched her. He did not apologize again. He just waited. The fire in the stove was the only voice. Miriam kept it fed. It was a concession. It said, "I am angry, but I will not let you freeze." He, in turn, accepted the bitter broth she offered, a silent acknowledgement of her care. The routine, broken by the fight and the blizzard's return, had to be rebuilt. It was the only way to survive. The snow had piled in massive drifts, sealing the door and covering the single window in a wall of packed white. The cabin was plunged into a gray, claustrophobic twilight, lit only by the guttering flame of the kerosene lamp. "We need to shovel," Miriam said on the second morning. Her voice was rough, dry. "I can help," Eli said. "You will tear your stitches." "I can sit by the door and move what you bring in. I am not an invalid." She looked at his leg, then at his stubborn face. She nodded once. It was brutal work. She used the cabin's single battered shovel. She had to open the door and attack the solid wall of snow, digging a trench, a tunnel to the outside world. It was heavy, wet snow. She would dig, her shoulders burning, until a pile accumulated by the door. Then Eli, sitting on the threshold, would use his hands and a stew pot to drag the snow inside, piling it near the stove where it would melt and make the floor a muddy mess. They worked for hours. He saw the sweat on her brow, the raw determination in the line of her back. She saw the way his jaw clenched every time he had to move, the pain it cost him to just sit and scoop. The silence between them began to change. It was no longer the sharp-edged silence of anger. It became the quiet of shared labor. Slowly, other tasks resumed. She would dig a path to the lean-to to feed her mule, Samson, who had survived on a small pile of hay. Eli sat by the fire and mended her glove, his fingers surprisingly nimble with the needle, patching the leather with a piece from his own ruined boot. She mended the shirt she had cut from his body, the stitches small and neat. They did not talk of the kiss. They did not talk of the night before. They talked of wood. "The pile is low," she said, looking at the small stack by the stove. "The wood pile is buried." "I know." "I can help you dig for it," he said. "We will do it tomorrow." That night, the quiet felt different. The work had tired them both. The small, shared goal, survival, had sanded the sharp edges off their anger. Eli was rubbing tallow into her cracked boots to waterproof them. Miriam was cleaning her rifle, the click-clack of the metal parts a rhythmic, comforting sound. He stopped, his hands greasy with the tallow. "Miriam," he said. She paused, the rifle bolt in her hand. About what I said about my wife." She tensed, waiting. "It was not pity," he said, his voice low, his eyes on the boot in his hands. "I did not mean it as pity. I meant it was the truth. I have not been close to anyone, decent, in a very long time. It scared me. You scared me." Miriam did not answer. She slid the bolt back into the rifle and sighted down the empty barrel. Eli continued, his voice rough. "You asked what happened to me?" She lowered the rifle, her gaze fixed on him. "I fought," he said, "back east, for the Union. I saw a lot of men die, did things I am not proud of. When it was over, I could not go home. There was nothing left there, so I came west, thought I could start over." He put the boot down. "My brother, Thomas, he came with me. He was younger, the good one. He believed in the Word of God. He carried that Bible everywhere." He nodded toward his saddlebags. "We filed a claim in Montana, near the Powder River, just a small piece, on a creek. We were building a soddy," his hands, resting on his knees, clenched into fists. "There was a cattle baron, a man named Glessner. He wanted our water. He said the creek was his. Thomas went to talk to him, to show him the claim papers. He thought the law mattered." Eli's voice went flat. "Dead." They rode out 3 days later, the men from the North Fork ambush. They were the same kind of men, hired guns. They did not just want us to leave, They wanted to make an example. They shot Thomas as he was pulling water from the creek. I was up the hill, cutting sod. I saw it. I had my rifle, but I was too far. He did not die clean. He took a long, ragged breath. I held him. I buried him. I took his Bible. I did not run. I went after them. I got two, but there were too many. They shot me in the shoulder. He touched the old, puckered scar. I have been drifting south ever since, looking for work, trying to forget. He finally looked up at her. His eyes were raw, stripped of all defenses. That is my past, Miriam. That is what I carry. It is not pity. It is just a matching set of baggage. Miriam stared at him. She saw the truth of it, the terrible, unvarnished weight he carried. It was not an excuse. It was a reason. He had not rejected her. He had rejected the pain of losing someone again. She sat in her chair for a long time. The fire crackled. The wind moaned around the corners of the cabin. She put her rifle down, leaning it against the wall. You ran, she said, her voice so quiet he had to lean forward to hear her. Ma'am, you ran south. At least you could run. I have been running in place for 2 years. She stood up, walking not to the stove, but to the one small window, touching the oiled paper, though there was nothing to see but the packed snow. You think this town whispers about me for fun? She said, her back to him. You think I am this way because I was born to it? She turned. Her gray eyes were not cold now. They were burning. My husband, Jedediah, she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. He was not a good man. He was not a kind man. He was cruel, and he was a drunk, and he had a heavy, heavy hand. Eli's face did not change, but a new stillness came over him. The townsfolk, she continued, her voice gaining a bitter strength. They all know. Mrs. Davies, who pulls her skirts away from me, Preacher Albright, who talks of damnation, and Sheriff Brody, especially him. They knew. They heard the arguments. They heard the breaking glass. They saw the marks when I was foolish enough to go to town for supplies after a bad night. She touched a faint, silvery scar that ran from her hairline into her eyebrow, a twin to his own. And what did they do? Her laugh was a sharp, broken sound. Nothing, Mrs. Davies told me it was a wife's burden. The preacher said to pray for Jed's soul, and Sheriff Brody. He told me I must have provoked him, that a man's home is his own, and what happens there is his business. She was pacing now, a small, caged circle. They did nothing. They just watched. They watched him drink himself into a rage, and they watched me learn to be quiet, to be invisible, to be dead inside. She stopped, facing the blackened timbers of the burned-out half of the cabin, the part of the house that was gone. You want to know about the fire? She whispered. The gossip says I let him freeze, or I said it. They are almost right. Miriam, he said, his voice a low warning. No, you showed me yours. You get to see mine. She turned back, her face pale in the lamplight. It was a blizzard, just like this one. 2 winters gone. He had been drinking for 3 days. He was mad about the snow, mad about the whiskey running out. He came at me. He was shouting. He hit me, knocked me clean over. My head hit the stove. Her hand went to the back of her head, an involuntary gesture. He laughed, and then he stumbled. He was so drunk, he fell, and he knocked the big kerosene lamp over, the one we kept on the table. She pointed to the empty, charred space. It broke. The oil went everywhere. On the floor. On him. He had fallen on the blanket by the fire. He was just lying there, passed out. Eli was holding his breath. The fire, she said, her voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper. It started, just small, the blanket, the oil. It just Whoosh! It caught. I was on the floor, by the door. I had a bucket of snow water right there. For drinking, I could have thrown it. It was small. I could have dragged him out. He was a mean drunk, but he was not a big man. Her eyes were locked on his, wide and unblinking, forcing him to see it with her. I sat there. I watched the flames. I watched them crawl up the blanket. I watched them touch his clothes. And he woke up. He started to scream. He was on fire. He was screaming my name. She took a single, shuddering breath. And I stood up. I turned my back. I opened that door. I walked out into the snow. I did not even take a coat. I walked out, and I let it burn. I let him burn. I listened to him scream until he stopped, and I just stood there in the snow, and I was glad. The cabin was utterly silent. I did not set the fire, she whispered, but I did not put it out. I am the thing they say I am. I am a killer. The dam broke. It was not a flood. It was a single, terrible crack. Her face crumpled. A dry, ragged sob tore from her chest. A sound of such profound, stored-up agony that it made Eli flinch. She did not weep. She just broke. Her body began to shake. Violent, uncontrollable tremors. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if to hold her own pieces together. Eli was moving. He did not use the crutch. He pushed himself off the cot, his bad leg taking his weight. He gritted his teeth, a sharp gasp of pain. But he did not stop. He limped the few steps to where she stood shaking, a terrible, solitary statue of grief. He did not speak. He did not offer words of comfort or judgment or forgiveness. He could not. He just reached out his good arm and put it around her shoulders. He pulled her against his side. He was warm, solid. He just held her. He stood there, his own legs screaming in protest, and absorbed the violent shaking of her body. He held her as she choked on 2 years of guilt and rage and silence. He was the first human being to touch her with kindness since Jed had died, and he just held her. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Miriam's sobs had quieted, leaving her exhausted, empty. Eli had guided her to the chair and gone back to the cot, his own leg trembling with the effort. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. The worst of themselves was out, laid bare on the cabin floor. That night, the storm howled, but inside, the air was still. Miriam did not sit in the chair. After stoking the fire, she looked at Eli. He was lying on the cot, watching her, his face weary in the firelight. He did not say anything. He just lifted the edge of the quilt. It was not a demand. It was an offer of warmth, of presence. She hesitated for a long time. Then she unlaced her boots and set them by the fire. She walked to the cot. She did not get under the quilt. She just sat on the edge, her back to him. She felt his hand, hesitant, touch her shoulder. She did not flinch. His fingers were calloused but gentle. He traced the line of her spine through her thin shirt. "Miriam," he whispered. She turned. Their touch was hesitant. It was not the angry, hungry kiss of before. It was something else. Slow. He touched her face, his thumb tracing the scar by her eye. She put her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. They moved under the quilt, huddling together for warmth. It was too cold to undress. It was not about that. It was about not being alone. It was a slow, intimate exploration, a quiet mapping of scars. His kiss was tentative, a question. Her response was a sigh, an answer. It was a desperate, tender, and slow affirmation, in the middle of the frozen dark, that they were both, against all odds, still alive. In the morning, the awkwardness was gone, replaced by a new, fragile quiet. They did not speak of what had passed between them. They did not need to. When she handed him his broth, her lips quirked, just for a second. At the corner, it was not her bitter smile. It was something new. And when Eli stood, he tested his leg. He still limped, but the limp was less. He walked to the door and began to shovel the new snow from the night, his movements more certain. The storm finally broke 4 days later. The sun came out, a blinding, brilliant white on a high blue sky. The world was transformed, buried, and clean. "I can see the top of the woodpile," Eli said, squinting from the doorway. The smoke from their stove, which had been hidden by the driving snow, now rose in a thin, straight column into the still, frigid air. It was a beacon, a signal of life. Someone saw it. It was Silas Croft, checking his trap lines, half-starved and angry at the storm. He was riding the ridge 2 miles east when he saw it, the smoke rising steady from the Calloway place. He had not seen smoke that steady from there in 2 years. He turned his horse and rode hard for Bitter Creek. The saloon was half empty. Sheriff Brody was there, nursing a coffee. "She is alive," Silas announced, stamping snow from his boots. "Who is alive?" Brody asked, not looking up. "The widow, Miriam Calloway, got smoke rising high and steady. She has been burning a hot fire for days." So, Silas said, leaning closer, his voice dropping. "I saw that bay gelding, the one that stumbled into her yard right before the storm, the one I told you about. It is dead, half buried near her lean-to, but there was no rider." Brody looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What are you saying, Silas?" "I am saying she was not been in town. She has been snowed in, and she has been burning a lot of wood, keeping a man warm, I reckon." A slow, yellow-toothed grin spread across his face. "Word is, that woman's got a cowboy now." Sheriff Brody's face darkened. He had courted Miriam. Before Jed, he had tried to kiss her, and she had slapped him. Hard. He had never forgiven her for it. The idea of her, the proud, cold widow, shacked up with some stray drifter. It was an insult. "Get Amos and Tate," Brody said, standing up, buckling his gun belt. "We are going to ride out. Check on the welfare of Mrs. Calloway." Miriam heard them an hour later, the heavy crunch of horses wading through deep, unbroken snow. Her blood went cold. "Eli," she said, her voice sharp. He was by the fire, whittling. He looked up, his hand freezing on the knife. "Get under the floor," she hissed. "The trap door, by the pantry." "Miriam." "Now," she commanded. "They are here for you, or for me. Either way, you cannot be seen. Go, and do not make a sound." He saw the cold panic in her eyes, a look he had not seen before. He moved. He grabbed his boots and his gun belt, lifted the small wooden trap door to a root cellar, and slipped inside, pulling the door down over him. Miriam smoothed the rug over the door. She grabbed a stocking and her mending basket and sat in her chair, her hands shaking. They did not knock. The door burst open, slamming against the wall. Sheriff Brody stood there, silhouetted against the blinding snow, flanked by Silas Croft and 2 other townsmen. "Miriam," Brody said, his voice a low sneer. He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the small, warm cabin. "You look comfortable." "Sheriff," she said, her voice like ice. "This is my home. You do not enter without knocking." "I am the law," he said, walking toward the stove. He sniffed the air. "Smells crowded. Heard you had a visitor." "I have been snowed in. Sheriff, same as everyone. I have had no visitors but the wind." Silas Croft pushed past him. "He is here. I know he is." He looked at the cot. It was messy. The quilt thrown back. "Sleeping too. Looks like—" "I am a restless sleeper. Silas," Miriam said, standing up, her sewing clutched in her fist. "Now get out of my house." Brody laughed, Still proud. Miriam, still proud. After all this? His eyes roamed her, lingering on her shirt, her trousers. Jed, he knew how to handle you. Maybe you just need another man to... Get out. Brody's face hardened. He looked around. He saw the 2 cups by the wash basin. He saw Eli's broken watch, which he had left on the small shelf. Brody picked it up. "This is not Jed's," he said. "It was a stray," Miriam lied. "I found it in the snow." Brody knew she was lying. He could feel it. He made a sign to his men. "Look around." They tore the cabin apart. They flipped the cot, throwing the quilt and mattress to the floor. They kicked her chair over. Silas pulled her pantry stores out, scattering flour and dried herbs. They found nothing. Eli was gone. Brody was furious. He had been made a fool. He stood inches from her, his face dark with rage. "You are a liar, Miriam. Always have been. Hiding men in your house. You are nothing but a..." "Say it," she whispered, her gray eyes meeting his, filled with a hate so cold it stopped him. "Say the word, and you will not leave this cabin standing. Sheriff." He stared at her, breathing hard. He saw she meant it. He snarled, "We are leaving." He turned. On his way out, he kicked the leg of her table, splitting the wood. Silas Croft, following him, stopped at the small, dead garden patch, the sticks for her beans sticking up from the snow. He put his boot against the fence post and kicked it, snapping the dry, frozen wood. He turned and spat a thick stream of tobacco juice onto her porch, just shy of her feet. "Tramp," he muttered. They mounted their horses and rode away, their laughter ugly in the clean, cold air. Miriam did not move. She stood in the wrecked cabin, the door wide open, the cold air rushing in. She stood there until she heard Eli pushing the trap door open. He climbed out, his face a mask of black rage, his pistol in his hand. "Did they?" She did not answer him. She walked past him to the door and shut it. She slid the bar into place. Then she leaned her forehead against the cold, solid wood. Her whole body was shaking, not from fear, not from grief, from a violation so profound it left her breathless. They had brought the town's filth into her home. They had put their hands on her things. They were trapped, not by the snow anymore, by the town. The days that followed Brody's visit were the worst. They cleaned up the cabin in a raw, furious silence. They set the table upright, but the split leg was a constant, visible reminder. They salvaged what flour they could from the floor, but it was mixed with dirt and scattered herbs, and there was precious little of it. The pantry was a ruin. The sense of violation was a physical grit in the air. The fragile intimacy they had built was still there, but it was now overlaid with something new, a hard, shared anger and fear. Spring was a rumor in the sky. The sun had a different angle, a brighter, harsher light that reflected off the endless snow. But it held no warmth. The snow itself was old. It was no longer a soft, white blanket. It was a thick, icy crust, feet deep, locking them in. It was a grave sheet. And the supplies were, finally, gone. Miriam shaved the last of the salt pork into a pot of boiling snow water. It made a thin, greasy broth that tasted of salt and desperation. There was no more flour. The rabbit snares she set came up empty. The animals were either gone or too smart. The bitter root was gone. There was only this, and the last of the willow bark tea. The hunger was a constant, dull ache. It shortened their tempers. The cabin, once a shelter, was now a cage, and the bars were closing in. Eli's limp was better. He could walk without the crutch, though he favored the leg. He chopped the last of the wood from the buried wood pile, his movement strong, but his face was thin. The scar on his brow seemed darker. He stood by the window, staring at the gray light on the snow. "There is nothing left, Miriam," he said, his voice quiet. "I will find something," she replied, her voice sharp. She was scrubbing the pot with a handful of rough grass. I have survived on less. You have survived. You have not lived, and you are surviving for one. I am eating your share. I do not begrudge you the food. I know. He turned to face her. That is what makes it worse. I cannot sit here and watch you starve on my account. Brody will be back. We both know it. He will not let it lie. Miriam stopped scrubbing. Her knuckles were white. Let him come. I cannot let him come, Eli said, his voice hardening. I cannot hide under your floor while he puts his hands on your things, while he talks to you that way. So what? She snapped. Will you shoot him? Will you shoot all 4 of them? And what then? They will send a dozen. They will burn this cabin to the ground with us inside. No, he said, his patience breaking. I am leaving. Miriam's head whipped up. The pot clattered into the wash basin. The raw, cold panic that she lived with every day seized her chest. He was saying the words every man said. He was leaving. You are what? I am leaving, he said, his voice firm, though his eyes were pained. The snow is hard. I can walk on the crust. The Double Horn Ranch is 20 miles south. I can get there in 2 days. They will need men for the spring thaw. I can work. I can get a horse, money, and supplies. I will come back for you. She stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief. Then a slow, dawning rage. It was a betrayal. After everything, after the confessions, after the intimacy, he was just another man, running. You will come back, she repeated, her voice flat, dead. Miriam, I promise, I am doing this for us. There is no us, she cried, and the words were torn from her. There is no us in this. There is just you, saving your own skin. You are abandoning me. You are leaving me here to face them alone, just like everyone else. That is not what I am doing, he shouted, taking a step toward her. I am trying to fix this. I am trying to get us out from under. I cannot fight them, and I cannot stay here and watch you waste away. You cannot, she mocked, her voice thick with a sarcasm that was pure pain. You are just like him, just like Jed. He promised to build a life. He promised to protect me. And what did he do? He used his fists, and he drank, and he left me. You are all the same. You take what you want, a warm bed, a woman to patch your wounds, and then you run. The cabin, which had held so much quiet, was now exploding with their wounds. That is not fair. Eli's face was dark with his own anger. He was not Jed. He was not the men who hurt her. He was trying to help. That is not true, Miriam, and you know it. I know what I see, she hissed. A man with his jacket in his hand, walking out the door, leaving me. I am not Jedediah, he roared, and the name echoed in the small space, shocking them both. Miriam flinched as if struck. Do not say his name in this house. I will say it. Eli was breathing hard, his hands clenched. He had carried her grief, held her while she shook, and now she was using that same grief as a weapon against him. I am not him. I am not Brody, or that filthy man Silas. I am not the men who shut the door on you, but you are treating me like I am. You are looking at me, and you are seeing him. You know nothing about what I see. I know you are so twisted up in what he did, so wrapped in that pain, that you are lashing me with his whip. You cannot keep punishing me, punishing everyone, for one man's sins. It was too much. His words hit the rawest, most protected part of her. He was right, and because he was right, he was unforgivable. Her hand moved faster than thought. It was a reflex born of years of fear and rage. She slapped him. The sound was a sharp, ugly crack in the cold air. It was not a weak slap. It was the full, desperate strength of her body. It snapped his head to the side. Silence. Absolute, ringing silence. There was no sound but the high, thin whine of the wind outside. Eli did not move. He did not turn back to her. He just stood there, the red, vivid print of her hand blooming on his cheek. Miriam's own hand was tingling, hot. She stared at it, horrified. She had done it. She was... Miriam, he said. His voice was not angry. It was broken. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were not furious. They were filled with a profound, terrible hurt. He looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the man who had held his dying brother, the man who had held her while she confessed to murder. And she had hit him. The fight drained out of her, leaving a cold, hollow emptiness. She broke. You think... Her voice was a trembling whisper. She wrapped her arms around her own stomach, a gesture of deep, old pain. You think it was just the beatings, that he just used his hands. Eli watched her, his expression unreadable, the mark on his face a stark accusation. It was the spring, she whispered, her eyes unfocused, looking at a spot on the floor. The spring before he died, I was pregnant. Eli's breath hitched. He took an instinctive step toward her, but stopped. I did not tell anyone, she mumbled, her body starting to shake. I was happy. Just for a minute, I thought, God help me, I thought, this will change him. A child. It will make him gentle. She let out a dry, gasping sob. He found out. He came home from the saloon. He was drunk. So drunk. And he was angry. He said it was not his. He said... She choked on the word. He did not want a child. He did not want a mouth to feed. He kicked me. Her hands tightened on her stomach, her nails digging into her own clothes. He did not use his hands. Eli, he wore his boots. I fell. She was crying now, silent, hot tears running down her face. I lost it, right here, on this floor. Right there. She pointed to a dark stain on the floorboards that she had never been able to scrub out. It was a boy, I think it was a boy. Eli's face was devastated. He looked from her to the spot on the floor, his own pain forgotten, replaced by a cold, sickening horror. And I crawled, she went on, her voice hollow, her gaze distant, reliving it. I thought I was dying. I was bleeding so much. I crawled all the way to town. It took hours. I got to Mrs. Davy's door, the preacher's wife. I knocked on her door. She opened it. She saw me. She saw the blood on my skirt. Miriam looked up, her gray eyes burning, awash in a pain so deep it was bottomless. And she closed the door. Eli, she just shut the door in my face. She said, clean up your own sin. Miriam, do not bring it to my house. She was shaking her head, the tears falling free. No one helped me. I crawled back. I buried it out by the... She could not finish. She looked at Eli, her face a ruin of grief. So you see what I am? I am the woman who let him burn for that. I am the woman the town closed the door on. There is nothing good here. There is nothing to fix. There is just rot and ghosts. She wiped her face with a shaking hand. Please, go. He was right. You are right. I am punishing you. Go, just go. Leave me, please. He stared at her. There were no words. I am sorry was a meaningless sound. He could not touch her. He could not fix this. The horror of it was too big. It was not just Jed. It was the town. It was the women. It was everyone. He had wanted to save her, and she had just shown him that she was far beyond saving. Without a word, he turned. He picked up his jacket. He grabbed his bedroll and the small sack with his few belongings. He did not look back. He could not. He opened the cabin door, The bright, cold air flooded the room. And then he was gone. The thud of the door closing was the sound of the world ending. Miriam slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her knees drawn to her chest. She did not cry. She had no tears left. She just sat in the terrible, cold silence and waited. For what? She did not know. For the cold, for Brody, for the end. She stayed there all night. The fire in the stove burned down, and the cabin grew cold. But she did not move. The sun rose. The gray light touched the objects in the cabin, the overturned pot, the dirty floor, the cold stove, and the table. She saw it. Sitting on the table, stark against the dark wood, was his watch, the heavy silver pocket watch, the one with the shattered glass. Its hands stopped forever at 3:10. She stared at it. He had taken his bedroll. He had taken his Bible, but he had left the watch. She remembered him turning it over in his hands when he told her about Montana. It was the one thing of value he had, the one thing that was his, not his brother's, a piece of his old life. He had left it. It was not a rejection. It was collateral. It was a promise. I am coming back. He had not abandoned her. He had believed her. He had listened to her plea. Go. And he had gone, because she asked him to. "Oh, God," she whispered. The sound was raw, ripped from her frozen lungs. He was out there. He was on foot. His leg was not healed. He had no food. He was walking into 20 miles of frozen wilderness, weak from hunger, to save her. She was on her feet in an instant. The exhaustion, the despair. It was all burned away by a new, white-hot panic. Not for herself, for him. She did not bother with a coat. She ran to the lean-to. "Samson!" she cried, her voice cracking. The mule brayed, startled. She threw the saddle on his back, her fingers fumbling with the frozen leather of the cinch. She grabbed her rifle from the wall, checking its load, and jammed a box of cartridges into her pocket. She mounted the mule, kicking him into a heavy, plunging run. She found his tracks easily. A single set of footprints, the right one deeper than the left, dragging slightly. His limp. She followed them, her heart pounding against her ribs. A sick, frantic drumbeat. The snow was crusted, but in the drifts, he would have struggled. She pushed the mule hard. "Eli!" she screamed, her voice thin in the vast, empty white. "Eli!" The tracks went on, mile after mile. He was stubborn. He was so stubborn. She saw where he had fallen, a larger depression in the snow, and gotten back up. She followed the tracks for hours. They led down into a gully, toward the gray, frozen line of a creek. And then she saw him. He was not moving. He was collapsed at the edge of the ice, half hidden by a drift of wind-blown snow. He had tried to cross, perhaps to find water, and his leg had given out, or he had just run out of strength. He was a dark, still shape against the white. "No," she breathed. "No, no, you do not." She slid off the mule, stumbling in the deep snow, and ran to him. She fell on her knees beside him. "Eli!" She grabbed his shoulder, rolling him over. His face was blue-white. His lips were cracked and dark. His eyes were closed. A fine dusting of snow was already gathering on his eyelashes. "Eli!" She shook him, hard. Wake up, you fool! You stubborn, stupid fool!" He did not move. His skin was so cold. She put her ear to his chest, praying. No, no, please, not this. Not him too. A beat, faint, fluttering, and then another. He was alive. A sob of pure, desperate relief tore out of her. She put her hands on his face, her own tears freezing on her cheeks. "You are alive. You are alive." His eyelids flickered. He groaned. A low, animal sound. His eyes opened. Just a slit. He saw her. "And Miriam," he whispered. The sound barely a breath. Cold." "I know," she said. "I know. I have got you. I am here." Getting him onto the mule was the hardest thing she had ever done. He was a dead weight, his body uncooperative. She had to haul him, half carrying, half dragging, grunting with the effort, her own muscles screaming. "Help me, Eli," she panted. "You have to help me." He tried. He got a hand on the saddle. She put her shoulder under his arm and heaved, shoving him up until he was draped, face down, over the mule's back. He was barely conscious. She climbed up behind him, her arms around his waist to hold him on, and turned Samson for home. The ride back was a blur of misery. He was shaking, his body seized by a violent, uncontrolled ague. She held him, her own body pressing warmth into his back, whispering to him, though she did not know if he could hear. "You are not leaving. I will not let you. You are not allowed. You hear me? Eli Rowe, you are not allowed to die." She got him inside, half dragging him from the mule to the cabin. He collapsed on the floor, the same way he had the first time. But this was different. This was not a stranger. This was hers. She cut his frozen clothes from his body. His skin was icy, his feet and hands a dead, waxy white, frostbite. She grabbed her quilt, her blanket, every piece of cloth she owned. She put him on the cot and piled them on. She stripped off her own wet clothes, down to her thin woolens, and climbed in with him, forcing her body against his, trying to give him her own heat. She rubbed his hands, his feet, hard. The friction was painful. He groaned, his voice stronger. "Hurts." "Good," she whispered, her voice fierce, tears running hot down her face. "Let it hurt. You stay with me. You feel it." She rubbed his chest, his arms, forcing the blood to move. You told me once," she sobbed, pressing her face against his cold neck. "You told me you were not afraid to hurt, not if it meant you got to feel again." She held his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Well, you get to feel this, Eli. You feel this. You stay. You stay with me." He stared at her, his eyes dim but conscious. He saw her tears. He saw the desperation. He saw her. That night, the fever came back, a hot, dry flush from the exposure. But it was not the fever of infection. It was the body's fight for life. She nursed him. She held water to his lips. She did not leave his side. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, he woke. The fever had eased. He was warm. He was weak, but he was clear. He looked at her, sitting beside the cot, her face pale with exhaustion, her eyes red from weeping. He lifted his hand, the one she had rubbed raw. He touched her cheek. "Miriam," he whispered. She said nothing. She just took his hand, holding it against her face, and closed her eyes. All the barriers were gone. The shame, the secrets, the violence. They had seen the absolute ugliest, most broken parts of each other. There was nothing left to hide. She climbed onto the narrow cot, sliding under the quilts with him. It was not the hesitant, questioning touch of before, and it was not the angry, hungry kiss. It was something new. It was desperate. He had almost died. She had almost lost him. His hands were weak, but they were purposeful, holding her. It was tender. They knew every scar, every old wound. They touched each other not as new lovers, but as two survivors who had finally found the other half of their own wreckage. And it was filled with pain, the pain of her past, the pain of his, the memory of the child lost on the floor, of the brother lost at the creek, of the doors slammed shut. They made love not to forget the pain, but to bear it, together. It was a confirmation, in the absolute, frozen dark, that they were alive. It was the only comfort left. And it was, for now, enough. The world, for a few days, was quiet. The healing of Eli's body from the cold was fast, but the healing of their spirits was a slower, more fragile thing. They existed in the small, warm cabin, bound by the intimacies they had shared, the confessions they had witnessed. The hunger was still there, a gnawing ache, but it was a shared burden. They drank their thin broth and knew, without speaking, that this fragile peace could not last. The cabin was a shelter, but it was also a prison, and the town was waiting. "We are out of salt," Miriam said one morning, scraping the bottom of the small wooden box. "And flour, and everything." Eli was standing by the door, testing his weight on his wounded leg. The limp was still there, a slight drag, but the strength had returned. He had been chopping wood from a fallen tree, building their supply back up. He looked at her, his face thin, but his eyes clear. "Then we go to town," he said. It was not a question. It was a statement. Miriam's hand stilled. "Go to town? Together?" "I am not hiding under your floor again. Miriam, I will not have you face them alone. Not ever again." "They will. Eli, they will see you." "Let them see," he said. "We need supplies. We will go. We will buy what we need, and we will leave. We go in the light. We show them we are not afraid." She looked at him, at the stubborn set of his jaw, the steadiness in his gaze. He was not the broken man she had dragged in. He was a man who had made a choice. He was standing with her. A knot of fear and a strange, fierce pride tightened in her chest. "All right," she said, her voice quiet. "We go." They walked. The snow was still thick in the drifts, but the path to town, packed by riders, was slick and hard. Miriam rode Samson, her rifle resting across her lap. Eli walked beside her. He had his gun belt on, the pistol heavy on his hip. He had cleaned and oiled it until it shone. Their arrival in Bitter Creek was a stone dropped in a stagnant pond. The whispers started at the edge of town, by the tanners. A woman emptying a bucket of ash onto the muddy street froze, her mouth falling open. She scurried back inside, and a curtain in the window twitched. By the time they reached the main street, every head was turned. Silas Croft, standing outside the saloon, stopped mid-sentence. His yellow-toothed grin faded. He spat into the snow, his eyes narrowing, first at Eli, then at Miriam. "Well, well," he muttered, loud enough for them to hear. "Look what the blizzard thawed out. The witch and her pet." Miriam's hand tightened on the rifle. Eli's hand did not move toward his gun, but he stopped walking, turning his body slightly to face Croft. "Morning, Mr. Croft," Miriam said, her voice clear and cold as ice. "A hard winter, it makes men bitter." She nudged Samson forward. Eli matched her step, his eyes never leaving Croft until they had passed. They moved down the street, an island in a sea of hostile silence. The men's leers were still there, but they were mixed with something else: confusion, anger. Eli was not some drunken stray. He was tall, he was armed, and he was walking beside her as if he had every right in the world. The women, their faces were colder. Mrs. Davies, sweeping her boardwalk, stopped and simply stared, her expression one of profound, righteous disgust. They saw Miriam, not as a victim, but as a sham. Her 2 years of proud, isolated grief were, in their eyes, a lie. She had not been grieving. She had been waiting. Miriam kept her chin high, but this was different. She was not alone. She could feel Eli's presence beside her, solid and calm. They stopped at Hatcher's General Mercantile. They dismounted. Eli tied the mule to the hitching post, his movements deliberate. He looked at Miriam. "Ready?" She nodded. They walked in. The bell above the door jangled, loud in the sudden, absolute silence. Mr. Hatcher, who was weighing beans for another customer, froze. The customer, a ranch hand, slowly turned. "Mr. Hatcher," Miriam said, as if it were any other day. "Miriam," Hatcher said, his voice wary. His eyes flicked to Eli, taking in the gun, the limp, the quiet authority. "We need supplies," she said. She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. 10 pounds of flour, 5 of cornmeal, salt, coffee, a side of bacon, and cartridges, 30-30, and 44. She was not bartering, she was buying. Eli stepped forward, placing a few coins on the counter. It was not much. It was the last of his pay from Montana, but it was coin. Hatcher looked at the money, then at Eli. That is quite an order." "We aim to pay for it," Eli said. The bell jangled again. The warmth of the store vanished. Sheriff Brody filled the doorway, his bulk blocking the light. Silas Croft and another man, Tate, were behind him. Brody's face was dark red, his eyes small and furious. He was not here by chance. He had been summoned. "Well, well," Brody said, his voice a low sneer. He did not look at Miriam. His entire focus was on Eli. "The stray finally shows his face. Thought you would have kept running, boy." "I am not running," Eli said. He did not move away from the counter. He and Miriam stood side by side. "No?" Brody smiled, a terrible, false smile. He took a step into the room. "That is not what the wire says. I got word this morning from the marshal up in North Fork Territory. They are looking for a man fitting your description. Name of Eli Rowe. Says you were aiding horse thieves. Says you were part of the gang that ambushed a rancher in his hands." Mr. Hatcher looked ill. The other customer slowly backed toward the door. "That's so," Eli said. It was not a question. "That is a lie," Miriam said. Her voice cut through the tension. It was not loud, but it was sharp, and it was public. Every eye in the store, Brody's, Hatcher's, Croft's, snapped to her. "You be quiet, Miriam." Brody growled. "This is lawman's business." "It is my business," she said, taking a step forward, placing herself half in front of Eli. "This man was ambushed himself. He came to my home half dead, with a bullet in his leg. A bullet from that fight. He was no thief. He was a victim." "He was a victim?" Brody laughed. "You believe this drifter? This man who hides in your bed?" The store was silent. The insult hung in the air, thick and vile. "I believe him," Miriam said, her voice shaking but full of a cold, clear rage she had never shown in public. "He is a better man than anyone in this town. He is a better man than you, Sheriff Brody, who let my husband beat me and called it a man's business. He is a better man than you, Silas Croft, who spits on my porch. This man stayed. He helped me. He protected me. When did you ever protect anyone but your own cruel pride? The town's dirty laundry, her private, open secret, was now shouted in the middle of Hatcher's store. Brody's face went from red to purple. Hatcher looked like he wanted to be sick. He is a criminal," Brody sputtered. "No," Eli said, his voice low. He put his hand on Miriam's arm, gently moving her aside. He faced Brody. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady. "I was in North Fork. I knew the men. They were my brother's neighbors." He looked at the floor, then back at Brody. "They were accused of stealing horses from Glessner, the Baron, but Glessner's men had rustled their stock first. It was a land war. Sheriff, not a theft." "He admits it," Croft cackled. "I admit," Eli said, his voice rising, "that I stood with my friends, and when they were ambushed, I fought back. I did not aid thieves. I aided a man whose brother, my friend, was shot dead for his own water." His hand went to his saddlebag. "To the Bible. I made it right. I buried the dead. And I left. That is the whole of it." It was a confession, but it was also a condemnation. Brody was taken aback. This was not a simple criminal. You still ran," Brody said, his authority slipping. I was wounded. I was 1 man against 10. I did not run. I survived. A long, tense silence. Brody was out of his depth. He had no warrant, just word. He could not arrest Eli on hearsay, not when the man was armed and clearly not looking for a fight, but not willing to be pushed. And Miriam, she had just shamed him in public. "You," Brody pointed a thick finger at Eli, "you are not welcome here. And you." He turned to Miriam, his eyes full of venom. "You have made your choice. You have cast your lot with him. Do not come crying to me when he leaves you, or when his friends come looking." He turned on his heel. "Come on, Silas." "But, Sheriff—" "Now," Brody roared. They left. The door slammed shut, making the bell ring a wild, frantic tune. "Mr." Hatcher let out a long, slow breath. He looked at Miriam, then at Eli. His expression was no longer hostile. It was something else, pity, fear. He quickly, silently, filled their order. He pushed the bags across the counter. "Mr. Hatcher," Eli began, pushing the coins. Hatcher pushed them back. "No, just go, take it. Please, just go." They left the store. The street was still watching, but the whispers were different now. Miriam had spoken. She had confirmed the rumors of Jed's cruelty. She had defended the stranger. They were not just a scandal. They were a side. They walked back to the cabin, the heavy bags loaded on Samson. They did not speak. The confrontation had drained them. They had won. They had stood together. And the town had, for a moment, backed down. But they both knew it was not over. They had shamed Brody. And a shamed man is a dangerous man. That night, they sat by the fire. The cabin felt safe again, stocked with coffee and bacon. Eli held her hand. You did not have to do that," he whispered. "To say all that. About Jed, about—" "Yes, I did," she said, looking into the flames. "They closed the door on me for 2 years. It was time I showed them what was on the other side." She felt a strange lightness. The shame. It was not gone, but it was no longer just hers. She had given some of it back. They went to sleep, huddled together on the narrow cot, exhausted, but for the first time, not as prisoners, as partners. The smell woke Miriam. Smoke, thick, pungent, pine smoke, not the smell of her stove. She sat up, her heart leaping into her throat. "Eli!" He was already awake, grabbing his pistol. The room was glowing. A flickering, unnatural orange light was coming from the window. "The roof," he whispered, his voice tight with horror. A sound, a whoosh, and the oiled paper window burst into flames. The crackle of fire was all around them. It was not on the roof. It was all of the roof. Someone had thrown kerosene. "They torched it!" Miriam screamed, a sound of pure, animal terror. "The door!" Eli yelled. He ran to it, pulling the bar. The wood was already hot to the touch. He ripped it open. A wall of fire greeted them. They had set the porch, the door frame, everything. They were trapped. "The lean-to!" Miriam cried, her mind racing. "The back wall, where the fire was!" She ran to the back of the cabin, to the wall of blackened timbers that separated her room from the mule's lean-to. It was the weakest spot. Eli understood. He raised his heavy boot and kicked. The old, half-burnt wood splintered. He kicked again and again, ignoring the pain in his wounded leg. Fire was now dripping from the ceiling. The cabin was an oven. He smashed a hole big enough to crawl through. "Go!" he yelled, pushing her. Miriam scrambled through the splintered wood, into the dark, smoky lean-to. Samson was screaming, kicking at his stall. "Eli, come on!" He was not behind her. He had turned back. "The supplies! The rifle!" Eli, no, it is not worth it. He ignored her, disappearing into the roaring heart of the fire. She heard a crash as the main roof beam gave way. Eli! He burst back through the hole, his hair singed, his face black with soot. He had a rifle in one hand and one of the supply sacks in the other. He threw them to her. Get the mule! Go! Go! She untied Samson, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the knot. Eli was smashing the lean-to's flimsy outer door. They burst out into the night, into the freezing, clean air, just as the entire cabin collapsed inward, sending a volcano of sparks and flame into the black sky. Miriam fell to her knees in the snow, watching. It was gone. Her home, her prison, the place she had lost her child, the place she had found Eli, the place her husband had died. It was all gone. A roaring, hellish pyre. Miriam, Eli said, his voice ragged. He pulled her up. We have to go. They are still here. He was right. A shout from the ridge. A dark shape. Brody. Silas. They were watching their work. Eli threw her onto Samson's back. He grabbed the rifle, the bag of supplies, and slapped the mule's rump. Run! Into the woods! Follow the creek! He ran beside her, his limp pronounced, his breath tearing from his lungs. They plunged into the dark. Frozen pines, the roar of the fire and the triumphant, drunken yells of the men behind them. They ran until the mule was exhausted and Eli was collapsing. They hid in a deep thicket, miles from the cabin, and watched the glow in the sky fade as their home turned to ash. They spent the rest of the night huddled under a single blanket, sharing body heat, the mule tethered nearby. They had one sack of supplies, flour, salt, coffee, and the rifle. Everything else was cinders. They were homeless. They were fugitives. When the gray, cold light of morning came, they were stiff and shivering. They will come looking, Miriam whispered, her voice hollow. I know, Eli said. His face was grim, smudged with soot. We have to find shelter, a place they will not look. They spent the day moving, staying low, following the creek bed up into the low mountains. They found a place, a rocky overhang, a shallow cave, protected from the wind by a curtain of ancient pine. It was not a home, it was a hole in the rock. But they made it theirs. Miriam, her shock turning to a cold, hard resolve, gathered pine boughs for a bed. Eli, his knife his only tool, cut poles to build a crude lean-to against the rock, weaving the branches together to create a windbreak. It was primitive, it was cold, but it was theirs. They had built it from nothing. With their bare hands, they sat inside, out of the wind, and Miriam managed to build a small, smokeless fire. She mixed flour and snow and cooked a tasteless, gritty bread on a hot rock. They ate in silence. That night, as they lay tangled together for warmth, Eli spoke. This is not a life, he whispered, his voice rough. We are alive, she whispered back. That is all that matters. No, he said. It is not. I will not have you living in a cave, hunted. I will not have you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. I brought this on you. Brody, the fire, it is because of me. It is not, she said fiercely. It is because of them, because of Brody, because of Jed, because of their filth. It is not your fault, Eli. It does not matter whose fault it is. It only matters how to end it. She tensed. What do you mean? He was quiet for a long time. I have to leave. The words hit her like a slap, the same as before. No, she said, her voice rising in panic. She sat up, clutching the blanket to her. No, you are not leaving me again. We will go north. We will go to Montana. We will disappear. And live how? He said, his voice hard, but pained. As fugitives, with me wanted for horse theft, with Brody sending word to every marshal from here to the border. We will never be safe. They will always be behind us. You will never be free." "I do not care about free," she cried, tears of rage and fear in her eyes. "I care about here with you. Do not leave me again, Eli. I am begging you. I cannot do it again." He sat up, taking her by the shoulders. His grip was firm. "Miriam, look at me." She met his gaze, her own wild. "The last time I was running from you. From what I felt. I was a coward. This is different. I am not running from you. I am running for you, for us." "What are you saying?" "I am going to turn myself in," he said. Her blood went cold. "No, they will hang you. Brody." "Not to Brody," he said. "He is not the law. He is just a bully. I am going to Fort Laramie, to the territorial marshal. I am going to tell him the truth. I am going to tell him about Thomas, about the land war, about Glessner's hired guns. I have Thomas's Bible. He wrote in it names, dates. He wrote down what Glessner did. I am going to clear my name. For real." "They will not listen," she sobbed. "They will just lock you away." "They will listen," he said, with a certainty that calmed her. "Men like Brody, men like Glessner, they cannot stand the light. I am going to bring the light." And what am I supposed to do? Just wait here, in this hole?" "Yes," he said, his voice softening. "You are a survivor. Miriam, you are the strongest person I have ever known. You can survive this. You can wait. I need you to wait. I will come back. I swear to you, I will come back." She clung to him, her face buried in his chest. She begged him not to. She raged. She cried. And finally, exhausted, she just held him. He left before dawn. She woke to the cold. The place beside her, on the pine boughs, was empty. She sat up, a cry already in her throat. "Eli?" He was gone. She scrambled out of the lean-to. He was not there. The mule was gone. "No, no, no, no!" She sank to her knees. He had left her. Again. Then she saw it. On the flat rock where they had cooked, he had left his broken silver watch, and beside it, a single, folded page torn from his brother's Bible. She snatched it up. It was not a note. It was a verse. The one he had told her was underlined. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." And scrawled at the bottom, in rough pencil, were his own words. "I will return, free and worthy of you." Miriam clutched the paper and the watch to her chest. She was alone, colder than she had ever been. She was furious. He was a fool. He was a hero. He was a dead man. And she was afraid, terrified. The weeks passed. It was a blur. The snows began to melt, turning the world into a running, muddy mess. Miriam survived. She set her snares. She shot 2 rabbits with her rifle, hoarding the cartridges. She was a ghost. She was the woman the town had always thought she was, a wild, haunted thing living on the edge of the world. She was cold. She was angry. She was terrified. She paced the small clearing by the cave, her rage at him warring with her fear for him. Every snap of a twig was Brody. Every shadow was a rider. Her hope began to die. It shriveled, day by day, until it was a small, hard, cold stone in her stomach. He was not coming back. She knew it. He was dead, hanged in a Fort Laramie jail, or shot on the road. He was gone, just like Jed, just like her child, just like her home. Everything she touched vanished. One evening, the sun was setting, bleeding purple and red into the muddy snow. She was sitting by her small fire, staring into the flames. She had given up. He was gone. She was alone, again, forever. A sound, A horse, not a mule. A horse, moving steady, climbing the ridge. Her heart stopped. She grabbed the rifle, her hands shaking. She ducked behind the rock, her cheek pressed to the cold wood of the stock. It was Brody. He had found her. He had come to finish it. The horse came closer, a single rider. The rider stopped at the edge of the clearing. He was just a shape in the dusk. Miriam? Her breath tore from her lungs. It was his voice. She stood up, the rifle falling from her hands. It was Eli. He was on a tall, fine horse. He slid off, and he almost fell. His clothes were torn. His face was a mass of dark, swollen bruises. One eye was nearly swelled shut. But he was standing there. Eli, she whispered. She could not believe it. It was a ghost. I came back, he rasped. He stumbled toward her. She ran. She hit him with her full body, and they both collapsed to their knees in the mud. She was crying, great, choking, animal sobs. She was hitting his chest with her fists. Not to hurt, but because she could not contain the storm inside her. You are alive, she cried. You are. I thought. I know, he said, his voice thick. He grabbed her wrists, pulling her close. I know. He held her head against his chest, his own body shaking. They did not believe me. At first, they locked me up. But the Bible, Thomas's words, it was enough. Enough for the marshal to send a wire to Montana. He held her, stroking her hair. Glessner's men. One of them was caught. He talked. He told them everything. About the ambush. About Thomas. You are. I am free, Miriam, he whispered, and she felt his tears on her hair. The charges are dropped. My name is clear. She pulled back, looking at his face, at the terrible bruises. What happened to your face? He smiled, a broken, painful grimace. Brody, when the marshal let me go, he sent a man with me, a deputy. We rode into Bitter Creek. We had a talk with Sheriff Brody about the fire, about a few things. He touched his bruised ribs. He did not like being told the law. Eli was bruised, but he was free. He was home. They cried into each other's arms, there in the mud, as the last light faded from the sky. He kissed her. She kissed him back. It was not tender. It was not desperate. It was essential. It was the only thing holding them to the earth. It was air. It was water. It was the only thing keeping them alive. Spring came to Wyoming like a drawn-out, muddy apology. The snow did not melt. It rotted. It pulled back from the land, revealing the gray, sodden earth, the bones of animals that had not survived the winter, and the black, weeping scar where Miriam's cabin had been. The fire had been absolute. It had taken everything. All that remained was a rectangle of foundation stones and a chimney stack, standing against the gray sky like a tombstone. For weeks, they lived in the cave. It was a raw, primitive existence. Miriam hunted, her skill with the rifle feeding them. Eli, his face a map of fading bruises, his body lean and hard from the ordeal, ranged farther. He returned one day with Samson, the mule, whom he had found grazing in a sheltered valley, having run from the fire. It was a small, practical miracle. But they could not live in a cave. They were not animals. One morning, Eli stood at the edge of the clearing, looking at the distant, muddy track that led to Bitter Creek. It is time, he said. Miriam was cleaning the rifle. Time for what? To run? No, he said. He turned to her, his gaze steady. To build. We cannot let them win. We cannot let them have this ground. She looked at him. He was asking her to go back, to the place of the fire, the place of Jed, the place of her lost child. It is ashes, Eli. Ashes are what you put in the soil to make new things grow. He said, "It is our land. Miriam, the fire did not take the land." So they went back, leading the mule, carrying their few possessions, the rifle, the pot, the blankets, the supply sack. They walked out of the pines and stood before the ruin. It was the hardest moment yet. The air smelled of char and loss. Miriam stood frozen, her eyes on the spot where the floor had been, the stain she could never scrub out. It was all ash now. Eli took her hand. His was calloused, strong. "Together," he whispered. They began. The work was brutal. It was not just building, it was an excavation. They shoveled the ash, the cinders, the blackened bones of her old life. Every scoop was a memory. Here, the stove. Here, the cot. Here, a warped piece of metal that had been her mother's locket. Miriam found it, held it in her palm, and for a long moment did not move. Eli stopped shoveling, watching her. She closed her fingers around it, took a deep breath, and put it in her pocket. She did not cry. She picked up her shovel. They cleared the foundation. The stones were solid. The chimney was sound. "It is a start," Eli said, wiping soot from his face. They had no lumber, no tools but a knife and an axe Eli had fashioned from a sharpened rock and a hickory branch. They began felling young pines, stripping them, dragging them to the site. It was slow, back-breaking, impossible work. They were building a fortress with their bare hands. On the third day, a wagon appeared on the ridge. Miriam grabbed the rifle. Eli stepped in front of her. They waited. Two small, defiant figures against the backdrop of their ruin. The wagon drew closer. It was not Brody. It was not Silas. It was Mr. Hatcher from the Mercantile. He pulled his team to a stop, his eyes taking in the ruin, the small pile of fresh-cut logs, the exhaustion on their faces. He did not speak for a long time. He just sat, holding the reins. "Afternoon, Miriam, Mr. Rowe," he said, his voice gruff. "Mr. Hatcher," Miriam said, her voice wary. Hatcher cleared his throat. He would not meet their eyes. He stared at the chimney. I heard what Brody did, what Silas did." He shook his head. "Brody, he is not sheriff anymore. The marshal, he saw to that. He is gone. Silas and the others, they are keeping quiet." Eli and Miriam just listened. "Point is," Hatcher said, finally looking at them. His face was full of a deep, complicated shame. "A man cannot, a town cannot, just let this stand." He jerked his head toward the back of his wagon. It was loaded, not with supplies, with lumber. Good, clean pine boards, and tools, a hammer, a saw, a box of nails, an axe with a proper handle. I brought these," he mumbled. On credit. You can pay me back when you are able." Miriam stared at the wood. It was wealth. It was a future. "Mr. Hatcher, we—" "Just take it," he said, his voice rough. He climbed down from the wagon and began to unload it, his movements stiff. I have lived in this town 20 years. I knew Jed. I stayed quiet. I am ashamed. This," he patted a 2x4. "This is just lumber." It was an apology. The first. Eli stepped forward, his hand out. "We are grateful, Mr. Hatcher." Hatcher looked at Eli's hand, then grabbed it, shaking it once, hard. "Godspeed, son." He left. He did not look back. The lumber changed everything. They had a chance. The next day, another visitor, the blacksmith, a quiet German man named Schmidt. He brought a small bag. In it were hinges and a door latch, forged new. "A gift," he said, in his thick accent. "Is not right." They were not pariahs. Not to everyone. The cabin rose, board by board. Eli was a good carpenter. His movements economical and precise. He taught Miriam how to use the saw, how to hold the hammer. Their work was a rhythm. The thud of the hammer, the shing of the saw. It was the sound of a future being built. As they worked, others rode by. Some, like Silas Croft, sneered from a distance. But they did not stop. They were afraid now. Afraid of Eli, afraid of the marshal, afraid of the change. Others, they watched. The women, they would ride by in their buggies, pretending to be on their way elsewhere, their eyes fixed on Miriam. She was no longer the haunted, angry widow. She was a builder. She was a woman with a man who stood by her, not over her. She wore her trousers, her hair tied back, and she hammered nails with a steady hand. She was an impossibility, and she was a threat. One Sunday, Eli was squaring the frame for the new porch. Miriam, her hands raw but strong, was cleaning the rifle. She looked up. "What day is it?" "Sunday," he said. "I am going to town," she said. He stopped hammering. "We do not need supplies." "No," she said. "I am going to church." He stared at her. "Miriam, why?" "They have been whispering for 2 years. They have been watching me. They have been judging me." She stood, her face set in a way he had seen before, the day she defended him in the store. It is time they listened. She did not change. She wore her denim trousers, a clean shirt, and her boots. She braided her hair. She walked. Eli walked with her. He did not go in. He just stood outside the small, white-steepled church, leaning against a tree, his arms crossed. He was her guard. Miriam pushed the doors open. The hymn died. The small organ wheezed into silence. Preacher Albright, his hands raised, froze. The entire congregation, Mrs. Davies, Mrs. Albright, the blacksmith, the ranchers, the wives, all turned. Their faces were a mixture of shock, horror, and outrage. She was here, in God's house, dressed as a man. She did not go to the back pew. She walked, her boots loud on the wooden floor, all the way down the center aisle. She stopped at the front. She turned. She faced them. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear, amplified by the stunned silence. Mrs. Calloway." Preacher Albright sputtered. This is highly irregular. We are in the middle of worship." "I know," Miriam said. "You are here to worship God, to speak of sin and forgiveness. I am here to speak of the same." Mrs. Davies, in the front row, looked as if she had been slapped. "This is a disgrace." "A disgrace," Miriam repeated, her voice level. "You want to talk of disgrace? Mrs. Davies? Is it a disgrace to be beaten in your own home? Is it a disgrace to have your husband, try to kill the child in your belly?" A collective gasp. This was not a whisper. This was a shout. "Miriam," the preacher warned. These are private matters, unseemly." "They were public matters when you all stood by and watched," Miriam said, her voice rising, shaking with the force of her stored-up pain. "They were public when I came to your door, Mrs. Davies, bleeding, begging for help for my lost baby. And you closed the door. You told me to clean up my own sin." Mrs. Davies's face was chalk white. She looked small. "You all knew?" Miriam pointed. "Not at one, but at all of them. You all heard the screams. You saw the bruises. You all said it is a wife's burden. You said provocation. You said pray." "I did pray," she whispered, the fire in her voice cooling to a cold, hard ember. "I prayed for it to stop. And one night, it did. My husband, in a drunken rage, set our house on fire. He set himself on fire. He was burning, and I walked out. I let him burn. You all whispered I was a killer. You were right." The silence was terrible. It was the sound of a town soul being weighed. "I am a killer," Miriam said, her voice dropping. "I am a killer, and I am a whore. Am I not? Because a good man, a man you ran out of town, a man you tried to have killed. He showed me kindness. He stood by me. He did not hide. He did not run." She looked at them, one by one, her gray eyes missing no one. You talk of sin, my sin. I will live with, I will carry it. But what about yours? What about the sin of silence, the sin of the closed door?" She paused, taking a long, shuddering breath. "I am rebuilding my home. On the same land. I am not running. I am not hiding. And I will not be silent. Not anymore. You can whisper. You can sneer. But you will not ignore it. You will not close the door on me again." She turned, and she walked out. She walked down the aisle, her back straight, and out the doors, into the sunlight, where Eli was waiting. He did not ask what happened. He just held out his hand. She took it, and they walked home. The town did not know what to do. Some, like Mrs. Davies, left the church in a fury, saying Miriam was possessed. But others stayed. They sat in the PD grooves, in the terrible, loud silence she had left behind. The first woman came 2 days later. Miriam was on the new roof, nailing shingles. Eli was building a new garden fence. The woman was young, maybe 20. She was married to one of the ranch hands at the Double Horn. She stood at the edge of the yard, twisting her apron. "Ma'am," she called up, "Ms. Calloway?" Miriam paused, her hammer in her hand. "Yes?" The woman walked closer. She had a dark, purple bruise on her cheek, badly hidden with flour. I heard what you said in the church." Miriam looked at Eli. He stopped working, his face grim. Miriam climbed down the ladder. She stood in front of the young woman. He says it is his right," the woman whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I do not know what to do. I do not have anywhere to go." Miriam looked at her, at the bruise, at the terror. She saw herself. "You came to the right place," Miriam said, her voice soft, but hard as iron. "First, we will put some yarrow on that. Then you will eat, and then I'm going to teach you how to shoot this." She pointed to the rifle, leaning against the new wall. The woman's eyes widened. "Oh, no, I could not." "Yes," Miriam said. You do not have to use it, but you have to know how. You have to know that you have a choice. Knowing. That is what they are afraid of." She was the first. She was not the last. A week later, 2 more women rode out. Then, a quiet apology from Mr. Schmidt's wife. Then, an older woman, Mrs. Albright, the preacher's wife, came. She did not apologize, but she brought a small bag of seeds for Miriam's garden. "For your new start," she said, her face tight. It was enough. Eli, too, found his place. The rancher from the Double Horn, the one whose wife Miriam had helped, rode out. He was not a bully. He was a worried man. Mr. Rowe," he said, tipping his hat. I am in a bad way. Lost a good part of my herd in the melt. They are scattered. I hear you are good with a horse. That you know the land." "I do," Eli said. I cannot pay coin, but I can pay in calves, and I can help you finish your roof. My wife, she says you two are good people." Eli looked at Miriam. She smiled, a real one, not the bitter coyote smile, a small, real smile. "I will get my rope," Eli said. Life settled. It was not easy. It was hard. It was a life built of raw lumber and traded favors. But it was their life. Eli rode for the rancher. Miriam tended her garden. The women of the town, the ones who had been invisible, now had a place to go. They called it Miriam's sewing circle. They did not sew. They talked. They planned. And they practiced with the rifle. Far out in the hills, Miriam was no longer just a widow. She was a leader. The cabin was finished. It was not large. It had one room, a new, sturdy door, and a porch. It was built of fresh, yellow pine. It smelled of sap and hope. One night, a summer storm was rolling in. The sky was a deep, bruised purple, split by distant, silent flashes of lightning. The air was heavy, electric. Miriam and Eli sat on the new porch. She was shelling peas from her garden. He was mending a bridle. The thunder rumbled, closer this time, a long, low growl. Miriam's hand stilled in her lap. It sounds like the fire, she whispered. Eli put the bridle down. He looked at her. Her face was pale in the stormlight. I am still afraid, she said, her voice so quiet he could barely hear it over the wind. After everything, Brody is gone. The house is built. We have food, but I am sitting here, and my heart is pounding. I am afraid it will all be taken away. That the next storm, it will be the one that finishes it. Eli did not tell her not to be. He did not tell her it was over. He just listened. He moved his chair closer, their knees touching. He reached over and took her hand, not the one in her lap, the one holding the bowl of peas. He uncurled her fingers, taking the bowl from her and setting it on the floor. Her hand was scarred, from the work, from the life. So am I, he said, his voice as low as the thunder. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. I am, he said. I wake up every morning, and for a second, I am back in that gully. I am cold, or I am in the fire, or I am listening to Thomas. He shook his head. I am afraid, all the time, that I will wake up, and this, and you, will be gone. He interlaced his fingers with hers, his grip tight. But I will tell you this, Miriam, I would rather be afraid, right here, beside you, than be safe anywhere else in this world. She looked at their tangled hands. His, dark and bruised from ranch work. Hers, stained with dirt from the garden. The wind picked up, carrying the first heavy drops of rain, smelling of dust and ozone. It is a good house, she whispered. It is a good house, he agreed. They sat there for a long time, hands tangled, not speaking. They just watched the clouds. They watched the lightning break across the sky, and they listened to the thunder roll, and they did not run. Finally, the rain began to fall hard. Eli stood, pulling her gently to her feet. Come on, he said. Let us go inside. They turned. They stood before the new door. It was solid wood, the hinges black and strong. He looked at her. She looked at him. It was not her cabin. It was not his shelter. He reached for the new latch. She put her hand over his. Together, they opened the door to the small, warm room, lit by a single, steady lamp. They stepped inside, out of the storm, into the home that was half hers, half his, and all earned. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear where you are tuning in from in the comments below, so you can connect with fellow listeners. Do not forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.